boys into the cars. Jump now. Jump in front of the car. Go on, do it.
When I'm hearing the voices in my head, it's real. That weekend, I was partying, drinking. I didn't take my medication, so I was experiencing hallucination, delusions. It felt good. To me, it felt good. But I was on a collision course. I remember taking a taxi cab from the old Maple Leaf Garden on Church Street and taking a taxi cab to the airport. And, getting to the airport, I'm hearing voices. And the voice is telling me that I should get behind the counter and just punch up my own ticket. I kept saying that, Michael Jordan wants me to come down to Chicago to try it for the Bulls. And so I had that in my head. And so by any means necessary, I'm gonna try and get to Chicago. And I started walking towards the checkpoint to board one of the planes. I got to the security checkpoint, put my bag on the scanner. I was very agitated at this point. I eventually picked up my bag from the scanner and I started walking. So, that's considered breaching security. A lot of people at the airport were trying to restrain me, and the voice is saying in my head saying, get rid of them. And so I got onto the walkway to the airplane, and I didn't even know what airplane it was. So I'm on the plane at this point. I felt like I was Samson, trying to stop all these people from attacking me. So I eventually dropped my bag. I ran towards the curtain, closed the curtain, opened the door, closed the door. The next thing you know, I'm in the cockpit of the airplane. That's when I was arrested.
In the years following the 1998 incident at Pearson Airport, Elgin Barrett has learned to manage his bipolar mood disorder. More importantly, he's no longer embarrassed by his illness and is proud to be a role model for others dealing with mental health issues. Now married and father to 10-year-old Jada, Elgin's life is stable, and with his family, he's making plans for the future.
Elgin was arrested without incident, but as the inquest taking place here at the coroner's court shows, things could have ended much differently.
In October 2013, a coroner's inquest began into the shooting deaths of 3, quote, emotionally disturbed persons, all of whom were killed in confrontations with Toronto police. All 3 were known to be mentally ill. Mental illness is as individual as it is complicated. Psychiatric psychosis is a state of mind when a person experiences a break with reality, and it's a symptom of a select number of mental health diagnoses. These complex mental illnesses can include schizophrenia and bipolar mood disorder. The inquest is evaluating the way police treat people with mental illness, seeking a better way.
To assist the Toronto Police Service and me in examining our use of force and our response to emotionally disturbed persons.
A way that doesn't end in death. Elgin realizes how close he came to a similar fate.
I'm one of the lucky ones that got away, because if it was now, in this day and age, and I did that, I would have been shot dead. I know it.
Statistics show the mentally ill are more likely to be arrested than the general population.
But why are these confrontations between the mentally ill and the police happening in the first place? Some say the mental health care system needs more resources. Others say there are fundamental flaws in the way the system is organized. But it's undeniable, people are falling through the cracks, and the consequences are dire.
2 days before he breached security at Pearson Airport, Elgin sought help at Centenary Hospital in Scarborough. He knew something was wrong, but was denied care.
I went to the hospital and I said, doctor, I'm not feeling well. I want to be admitted. And the doctor looked at me and he did his assessment, and he said, well, you're not a danger to yourself or to anyone else. And so he sent me home.
After his arrest, Elgin finally got the care he needed. He was admitted to the forensic unit at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, also known as KMH, where his original diagnosis of schizophrenia was thrown out, and now with an accurate diagnosis of bipolar mood disorder, Elgin was put on the correct medication. Elgin's case should be the exception. Instead, it seems to be the rule. Judy Shire Weisberg's son was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia as a teenager. Judy says her music and her faith gave her the strength to deal with her son's illness by herself for many years.
But it was hell. Basically, my husband and I were not safe living at home. And again, I don't want people to think that it's everyone who has a mental illness. My son was a difficult case because, number one, we couldn't get him help.
Time and time again, Judy had her son hospitalized, hoping it would help. But every time her son would be discharged, despite the fact he was still unstable and unable to cope with his illness.
The day of discharge, when actually we thought he wasn't going to be discharged, the inpatient psychiatrist said, next time have him charged. In other words, they knew that he was being discharged and he would probably do something. So that's just very, very frustrating. And because the psychiatrist knew he needed long-term help, and that's the only way you can get it, is if you've committed a crime. It's shocking, isn't it?
Judy's son was declared not criminally responsible, or NCR, after committing a violent assault. He was recently released from the Psychiatric Detention Center in Whitby, Ontario, where he's been under supervised care for the last 3 years. Since his release, Judy's son has found the highly structured environment he always needed to manage his illness.
Sometimes, people with a complex mental illness are not taken seriously until they commit a crime. But that isn't the only problem with the mental health system. Canadian tax dollars pay for a network of caseworkers and supportive housing which are meant to help people manage their daily lives and watch for the signs of increasing psychosis.
At the Schizophrenia Society of Ontario, we believe that the right supports and access to needed services like housing, medical, social, and community supports, individuals can have a great quality of life.
But for those dealing with a complex mental illness without a support network, their path usually leads to one place: the streets. A 2004 study found that 66% of Toronto's homeless population have a lifetime diagnosis of mental illness, around 2 to 3 times the rate of the general population.
Probably in a course of a month, 50 men would come through here. And I would say about 75 to 80% of the men would have mental health issues.
Janet Hoy manages the schoolhouse shelter on George Street in downtown Toronto, which provides 40 men with a warm meal and a place to sleep. A housing worker is on site 7 days a week who tries to transition the shelter users into permanent housing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a slow process.
For transitional.
Because the Toronto housing list, it can be a wait list. You can be waiting for 8 to 10 years for housing there. So that's a long list. So we try to do whatever we can to see how we can speed it up.
But those with complex mental illness have many needs. For example, they may need supervision to ensure they take their medication. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to housing the mentally ill.
Sometimes even when you're put into mental health housing, there might not be enough support for you there. They might not be able to have enough housing workers there. So this is just my opinion, but to be able to be moved in, have a case manager following you, to make sure you make it to your appointments, to be there when you're not doing as well, they can help, make sure that you're seeing your doctor and that.
People trying to connect with a caseworker are funneled through a central intake office called Access One. This can link people with assertive community treatment, or ACT teams, which are mobile treatment units that help people with severe cases of mental illness in their recovery. There's limited support available while they wait for their turn, their golden ticket to access care. Cindy Rose, a mental health nurse with the City of Toronto, had no trouble getting her son Lucas, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, into care at KMH. But due to lack of oversight, he was able to escape from his secure unit. It happened so often, he earned the nickname Houdini. Because he was never formally discharged from KMH, Lucas didn't have an ACT team in place. So it was Cindy's job to find him.
He's had some horrific experiences over those years. He was mostly on the streets. He's been in shelters where he's been at great risk, been assaulted because of his delusions and how other people reacted to them. One of his delusions related to the fact that when his father was very ill with psychosis, his father was also on the streets and staying in one of the shelters in the city. And his father was actually unfortunately gang raped in that shelter. And Lucas knows that happened to his father. And so one of the delusions he developed while he was staying in the shelter system where his father had been is that some of the other people in the shelter were the people who actually assaulted his father. But his father's assault happened like 30 years ago, so, they're not, but that was his delusion. So he'd start accusing people he met in the shelter of being the people who assaulted his father. And that wasn't safe for him because, say it to the wrong person, you don't know what they'll do to you. Right? So it was a lot of really tough years.
Waiting for support when you're psychotic and on the street can be a matter of life and death. During one of his unsupervised escapes from KMH, Lucas smashed the windows of his psychiatrist's car.
So the police were called, and the officer who actually arrested him realized that he was in a very severe psychosis and phoned me to tell me that he had arrested him, and he recognized that he was in the severe psychosis, but basically the next step wasn't really up to him. And so he ended up actually being taken to Don Jail. I called the Don Jail and explained to them I was his substitute decision maker. They wanted proof. I got a copy of the form from CAMH. I wanted them to know that he's currently experiencing psychosis related to schizophrenia and he needs to be put back on medication. They wouldn't tell me anything. In fact, the nurse that I ended up speaking to in the infirmary there, I said to her that really he needed a hospital bed. And she said, well, we have all kinds of people here who need hospital beds, psychiatric beds. She said, I can't do it just because his mummy called. I can't make anything happen. And that was really condescending. I was really upset with the way she spoke to me. I couldn't get any information on what state he was in, whether he was receiving any medication, whether he was safe, whether he had any injuries, nothing.
Similarly, after Elgin was arrested, he was taken to the Maplehurst Correctional Facility in Milton, Ontario, where he was held for 3 months without psychiatric care.
The facility at Maplehurst was deplorable. I wasn't even given any medication, no assessment. I was up all night, no sleep. I was banging on the jail cell all night, shaking it violently. I was very angry, didn't want to be there. I wanted to get out. I wasn't given any medication. I felt that they didn't care at all about my situation.
But not every person with a complex mental illness ends up in jail or homeless. For some, the system works. If you met him on the street or at a party, you'd never know Chris Whitaker has lived with schizophrenia for over 30 years.
I had a library technician diploma. I'm volunteering at an art gallery, and I'm also playing piano at a long-term care hospital. And I also make time to do personal experience speaking. I talk about my experience recovering from schizophrenia. And I've had high-level jobs in my recovery. I was at that resource center. I worked my way up to executive director.
Chris believes that by sharing the story of his recovery and success through his public speaking, he helps combat the stigma associated with having a mental illness.
I've had one audience member say we can't all be a Chris, but I appreciate that. But I've also been pointed out that I've built up a support system brick by brick in my experience, and I have family support, and I have just a general lot of support in my community and my situation. And that's helped me. That's helped me stay on the course of a successful recovery journey.
Why does the mental health system work for some and not for others? While making this documentary, we looked for answers. We reached out to KMH and the Ontario Ministry of Health. We hoped to add their expert voices to the discussion. Neither granted our request for an interview.
Cindy's son Lucas was given probation for his offenses and was discharged straight from custody to the streets.
They knew that he was ill. They knew that he had no home. They knew that he had no clean clothes. Like, he didn't have a single thing that he owned except the dirty clothes he was wearing. Probation, discharge, let him go. To the streets, no support.
Cindy used all the resources at her disposal to get Lucas back to KMH. There was an order in place which authorized the police to bring Lucas to a psychiatric facility for assessment. The order was ignored by the police at 51 Division for days. Meanwhile, Lucas was in a shelter nearby, becoming increasingly psychotic. She told one of the on-duty officers,
"He's in danger right now because of his illness. He's in danger today, not 10 days, 20 days, 30 days from now."
Eventually, Cindy's persistence yielded results, and Lucas was picked up. But Cindy was so infuriated by 51 Division's lack of action that she lodged a formal complaint.
Part of the resolution of that complaint with the police is that I was able to do a presentation for each platoon in that division about family perspective on what it's like for families dealing with a family member who has a serious mental illness and the interactions with the police. Some of the officers I felt were very sincere and really listened to what I had to say and asked really appropriate questions. Other officers, just looking at them, I kind of got the sense, why do I have to be sitting here listening to this? Another officer said, "Well, what's your son's name?" And I said, "Why does it matter what his name is?" "Well, next time we get in touch with him, then we'll know who his family is." She says, "Frankly, I've never come across a person that I've apprehended under the Mental Health Act who even had a family." And I said, they all have families. Their families maybe are frustrated and don't know what to do, which is maybe why you're not in connection with their family. But every person out there who has a mental illness has a family somewhere and has people who raised that person and love that person. They just maybe don't know what to do, don't know where to find support, and have had to, take a step back, but they're there.
As a mental health nurse, Cindy knew how to work the system. Her personal experience and practical knowledge made it possible. And she believes that her determination saved her son's life. But sometimes determination isn't enough.
Elgin's mother, Valerie Barrett, was left with chronic pain after knee surgery in 2004. The pain led to depression.
My dad, he took her to the hospital and wanted to get her admitted. She was suicidal. He loved her and he wanted the best for her. And the doctor said to my dad that, she's fine, there's nothing wrong with her, and send them home. And the next day, my mom took her life. She jumped out the 6th floor balcony to her death. And, I was so upset about the system because where she helped me when I was going through my situation, the system failed her. And so I think, If my dad was taken seriously, you know, my mom would have been alive today.
Until the mental health system becomes efficient and responsive to the needs of its users, for many, family is the only safety net.
Family members, number one, know their family, if it's a child or whatever, know them the best, know the triggers or what to watch out for, and we have experience that the doctors don't have.
The family's input is key. They know their family members, and they see the changes first before anyone, before the doctors, before the police, before the ambulance.
I'm his only real advocate and his only support that he has out there. And, you know, he's my son and I love him and I would never abandon him no matter how sick he got. I said to him, you know, as many times as you disappear, I'll look for you. And I will always, always make sure that I will do everything I can to make sure that you get back to health and that you get as well as you can be again.
Oh, no, no.